We have here, my name is Becca Moreno, and we have Brandon Edmondson and Sarah Duke. We are here to do our final discussion for the Nursing Hackathon, where we've decided our topic would be childhood obesity. We're going to turn the time over first to Brandon to discuss what we mean by childhood obesity, and then afterwards we'll hear a little bit from Sarah about the prevalence of childhood obesity and why we felt like it was such a widespread problem that needs to be addressed. And then our plan includes three different parts, so all three of us will present a different aspect of the three-part plan. We'll start with Sarah about the familial influence that is had in childhood obesity, and then Brandon will speak a little bit about the exercise aspect of it, and then I'll conclude with the therapy that is associated with childhood obesity, and that will conclude our hackathon. So we'll turn the time over first to Brandon to talk about definition of childhood obesity.
Awesome, thanks, Becca. Yeah, so when looking at this topic and project, we got some guidelines from the CDC about obesity and being overweight. So the CDC, and we use their definition for this project, defines obesity in children as up to 19 years of age and within the 85th to 95th percentile based on BMI. And BMI is calculated with body weight and height. And then anything over the 95th percentile of BMI is obese. So that's kind of how we define the two categories of obese versus overweight.
As far as the prevalence of obesity is 18.5% and affects about 13.7 million children and adolescents. And then I have a breakdown by age group. In the 2 to 5 year old age group is 13.9%, 6 to 11 years old, 18.4%, and 12 to 19 years old is 20.6%. And as you can see, as we get older, kids get older, the prevalence of obesity, the rate is higher. So that's a problem.
Absolutely. We'll have you start, Sarah, with discussing our plan with the familial influence of childhood obesity.
Yeah, it's very important that we educate the whole family, that parents are educated, because they model behavior for the children, and children are gonna learn habits from parents. So one thing I learned is that when we educate parents, we need to take into consideration their culture. We have to be culturally sensitive and cater the education to their specific needs. At work, we have some literature specifically made for African Americans, for Tongan, just different ethnicities, because they all have different needs. We also want visually oriented information and handouts that are easy to read with simple language. We don't want complicated medical language. Also, one thing that I learned is that nearly 80% of parents of young children say that they prefer education over the internet, as opposed to handouts, which comes second, and then face-to-face or classes is the last in preference. The outcomes we want for parents is that they understand the kids' nutritional needs, that they understand the importance of good nutrition in promoting normal development and growth, and they understand the possible complications of having a poor diet, and that they use age-appropriate strategies to encourage healthy habits as well. Some interesting facts that I learned is that shared family meals reduce risk of obesity. So we are busy, but it's important to make time to get together and eat together. It promotes connectedness and also teaching moments. So it's a good thing to try to do. Also, more than 3 hours a day of TV or screen time, doesn't have to just be TV, is linked to obesity. So we want to reduce that to less than 2 hours a day. Another thing that is important to consider is that preschool age is when patterns of eating develop. So it is important, if possible, to start educating parents and everybody early on. Some things that we want to teach parents are that they need to provide plenty of fruits and vegetables, healthy foods in the home, that they need to model those good mealtime behaviors. And one thing that they emphasize in this reading is that we need to turn the TV off. And I know, like, maybe not so much a TV sometimes, but when I'm eating with my family, many times we'll have our phones and we're looking at our phones and we're not talking to each other, we're just on the screen. So let's put those phones away. We also need to serve small portions and encourage children to ask for more so that they learn to eat, not to feel full, not to eat a whole big portion we put in front of them, but just to kind of listen to their body and to eat until they're satisfied, not full. We as parents can make favorite dishes healthier. We can use lean meats, we can add more vegetables, all that. We need to limit soda consumption. Another thing is to offer a variety for little kids, especially. Offer a variety of healthy foods and kind of let them choose from the healthy choices. Kind of give them a choice. One thing that I really like is that cook with your child or cook as a family. We can all learn what healthy, what entails, and just kind of be more aware of what we're putting in our bodies. And that's a good way to teach healthy habits. And some ideas for healthy snacks, which I feel like I want to have healthy things available for kids, but sometimes I'm just not creative enough. So I like to be given ideas. So just like things that are good to have around is apples, bananas, blueberries, grapes, carrots, broccoli, bell peppers. You can serve those with hummus, things like that. So when shopping, because we decide as parents, what we're bringing into our home. So if we buy healthy foods, then there are healthy foods to eat. If we buy junk food, then there'll be junk food. So we want to eliminate those calorie-rich temptations. But one thing that I think is important is that we still offer treats once in a while, but that's limited. So it's actually a treat, not a constant. Also, I think we need to teach that, because sometimes we have to eat fast food. We can teach our children to make good choices, to be aware of the nutritional information on each item, to encourage to maybe get grilled chicken instead of the fried stuff, to not to eat a salad before we eat other things, and to not have creamy sauces, things like that. And I think that's important, especially with teenagers, because they want to establish their independence. They like to go out and get their own food with friends or whatever. So they have learned to make good choices when eating out. I think that can make a big difference too. Another thing that's important with teens, that we teach them to not skip breakfast, which I know I'm bad at that too. So, but when we skip breakfast, we're depriving our brain of important glucose that's necessary for concentration and problem solving, learning, all that. And then as far as solutions, I've been thinking more about this too. I think having an app that is, where you have everything there, access to calorie information, to portion size that's appropriate, and also I was thinking it would be really good to have some kind of link to your local rec center. And I've been thinking about this because recently I live in San Quentin, and as residents we got to vote whether we were going to have a recreation center in our city or not, and it got shut down because it was going to raise our taxes a ton, and then membership was going to be super high. So I was thinking if there could be some money invested to make this more affordable for everybody, and maybe have some kind of um, reward system where you sign up for classes that teach about nutrition, exercise, things like that, or you sign up as families or individuals, whatever. Um, Maybe you can have this included in an app so to make it easy and super user friendly. Um, and maybe you could earn rewards to have free access to the pools, to all the other fun things. 'Cause that's something that my kids love to do. They love to go to the rec center, but I feel like it's not affordable for a lot of people. But if we made an investment, which maybe losing money up front to make this more available to more people at a lower cost, but I think down the road we'll save so much money and healthcare costs if we can have healthier children. That I think would be totally worth it. So that's what I got.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, like Becca mentioned, I'm gonna talk about kind of the exercise and like active lifestyle aspect of our plan to combat childhood obesity. And just as like a disclaimer, a lot of these ideas I realize are very large scale, not things that we can implement just on our own. But I think that with how widespread this issue is, I think this is something that is really the only way to solve it is at that level of large scale involvement from just a lot of different organizations and groups to really combat and change this problem. One of the biggest things I noticed and was thinking about is that a lot of students have these after school programs, but a lot of these after school programs focus on like academic things, computer programming, things like that, which are great. But I really think if we implemented some after school programs that focused on activity and like exercise, that could have a huge impact on the obesity rates in children. And going along with that, another thing I thought of is that we've seen a decline in the amount of time kids are spending in PE just in their classes, and that PE time is getting cut to make room for math and science and other things, which again are noble goals, but I think we are not acknowledging how important that physical activity is. And like Sarah said, I think even though that doesn't give us much time for math and science, I think long term it's going to have a bigger impact on decreasing cost of healthcare if we can keep these children healthy from an early age. Um, Another thing that I think is really important here is not pushing exercise so much as pushing active living, because I think a lot of people, when they hear exercise, they get intimidated and they feel like they have to go to the gym and work out really hard. And that can be scary. But really, even something as simple as walking can have a huge impact. So if we can help children see that, hey, it's not so much that you need to be like exercising every day, so much as just being active, I think that shift in mindset would help motivate more people to actually be active. And going along with that, something I noticed, I lived in Australia, in Sydney for a couple of years, and they have a lot of parks, but these parks all have exercise equipment that you use with just your body weight. And I saw a lot of people use them, and it's not something that I've seen very much, at least in this part of the United States. And I think if we put that kind of equipment into our parks, I think it would have a huge impact. I think that one, it would provide the equipment people need to exercise and to be healthy. A lot of people, like Sarah mentioned, can't afford a gym membership or recreation center. So if this equipment was available to the public in a park, I think it would help a ton. And then I think just seeing that equipment and seeing other people use it just kind of keeps it more in our mind of like, oh, hey, I need to be active, I need to exercise and do these things. So I think if we were able to implement that into our communities, I think that would also have a big impact on helping children be more active and preventing this obesity. Another thing that I've thought a lot about is just like the infrastructure we have for getting around and commuting. And something I read that I found really interesting, this came from Portland, Oregon, and so they actually built over 300 miles of cycling lanes in Portland. And the interesting thing is that the cost of that infrastructure actually costs less than it would cost to build 1 mile of freeway. So I know that there can be pushback because things like that are so expensive, but when you look at it in comparison to like freeway or infrastructure for cars that we think is so essential, it's actually really cheap. And I think providing places like that so that children and adults alike feel more comfortable and safe riding their bike to the park or to the grocery store and things like that, I think would help switch our culture to more of an active lifestyle type culture, and realizing, oh, hey, it's actually safe and it's okay for me to ride my bike to do this errand instead of having to get in the car. And I think just little things like that every day really have a huge impact on our health and obesity. And if adults are doing this, children are going to do it as well. And it will just snowball. And I think as we make the entire community healthier, we're going to help fight childhood obesity. So the last idea I had, this is kind of similar to what Sarah was saying about an app, but I think specifically if all developers, web developers, put something into their apps where we get like a little reminder to be active, I think it'd have a huge impact. A lot of people wear these smart watches, which are good, and they'll beep every so often to remind you to walk and get your steps in. But not everyone uses those watches. And so I think if the web development industry as a whole started putting these notifications into their apps, so when kids are using them for a long time, if every hour they got a little pop-up reminder of, oh, hey, you need to go walk or go outside, I think it really would help kids realize, oh, I've been out here for a long time, I need to go outside and be active. And so again, like I said, it's kind of a large-scale thing. We need cooperation from a lot of different industries. But I think if we're able to achieve all of these things, we will increase like the overall active lifestyle we have as a culture in this country. And I think that really will have a massive impact on reducing childhood obesity. So those are kind of my points for that idea of exercise.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brendan. I think you've hit on so many important parts of this. I really appreciate that you talked about how this is kind of a change in mindset and almost a culture, really. A lot of people have such negative connotations towards the words diet and exercise, and they think that that's something you do for a short amount of time to be able to lose weight. But we're talking about ways of living. This is changing these child's lives, but also these children's lives, but also adults and how we live our culture as Americans and even across the globe, because this is a global problem. Um, I think some important things to mention before I get too much into my topic of the therapy associated with childhood obesity is that this should be managed under a pediatrician and a nutritionist. So we have a lot of suggestions, and this might not be a one size fits all kind of a deal for each child. That this really might depend on the family socioeconomic status. This might depend on the resources that they have available, and sometimes these childhood obesity issues stem from maybe more emotional issues. So then your therapy is going to be geared towards the emotional problems. A lot of people sometimes just lack the knowledge. They have a disparity in how to take care of their health. So sometimes it's teaching parents how to shop healthy on a budget. So it kind of depends on what the disparity is in the family, but that should be evaluated and assessed by a pediatrician and a nutritionist and handled accordingly. It would always be beneficial though to consider a behavioral therapist, and a lot of the different kinds of therapy would depend on the developmental age of the child, as well as if there are any other factors like cognitive delays or what motivates the child in general. I also think, as I read through the literature, we definitely have a lot to say about this being a family activity. This being, family-based therapy could definitely go a long way for these children and their lives, and how that will also influence their parents. And maybe if they are struggling with something similar with obesity in adulthood, then that could also, if they have their child there to motivate them, then it could make some influence there as well. I recently took care of a patient who came into the emergency department with some really bad edema in bilateral lower extremities, and I was in with the physician's assistant doing the initial exam, and she asked him, if he consumed a lot of salt, especially she asked specifically about that day. And he said, no, I didn't put much salt on my food today. Maybe just a little bit, and she said, well, tell me what you ate today. And he said, well, tortilla chips covered in Velveeta cheese and sausage. And this man truly didn't understand that those are sodium dense food items. He didn't realize that sodium is more than just table salt that you put on food. And so it was a moment for education for us. But I wonder how many people have that huge disparity in what nutrient dense food is, and what nutritional value different food products have to offer. And later he had his family come in, and he even told us that he kind of lived in a lower socioeconomic status, but his 4 children came in and they were all obese. And I can't help to think, but he probably has some influence in his lack of knowledge of what nutrition is, for his children. They probably think that a plate of tortilla chips and velveted cheese and sausage is just fine. So, which I'm not saying that's not acceptable at all. I'm just saying if that's your idea of a nutrient dense plate, then I think there's maybe some lack of understanding there. So as I said before, these therapies are dependent on the developmental stage of the child. For example, anyone who has kids knows there's a big difference between their children under 12 and their children over 12. One of the articles I read suggested play therapy for children under the age of 12 years old. And it kind of defines it as this, as the following. It says the systematic use of a theoretical model to establish an interpersonal process wherein trained play therapists use the therapeutic powers of play to help clients or resolve psychosocial difficulties and achieve optimal growth and development. So it kind of talks about how therapists direct their play towards an identified goal and present an issue, and use skill building and kind of a non-directive approach, where they reflect on emotions and observe behaviors and offer positive regard for how the child is playing. So that's going to be a lot more beneficial to children under 12 because they're still developing cognitively. It talked about. I also found an article that talked a lot about psychological therapy for teenagers would be beneficial because they're starting to understand their emotions better and be able to recognize. So it talks about helping them develop mindfulness and helping them develop self-compassion. So mindfulness in the sense that it's the kind of that inner capacity of cultivating awareness with this more non-judgmental attitude, and self-compassion about being kind to yourself and accepting difficult experiences and negative aspects, without that self-judgment and isolation and over-identification that often spiral and snowball into these negative behaviors that can sometimes lead to eating disorders. It also talked about, I also found an article that was very interesting that talked about how childhood obesity would be treated in a child more under the age of 12, but that dealt with autism. So, as much as we definitely need to keep it in the 2 hours suggested, the 2 hour suggestion from Sarah, but using video game therapy as with its ability to engage the young clients, and being a mode of treatment. So it talks about how children will take part of it because they enjoy it, and they also they'll be more intrinsically motivated, and behavioral changes are more likely to be maintained. So there's a lot of different resources and a lot of different therapies that are available to these children when we talk about how we can help change their behaviors and help change their mindsets and help change our culture. But those things always just need to be considered and assessed again under a pediatrician and nutritionist who can properly decide what will work best for this family and what will work best for this child. In conclusion, we definitely we kind of identified that with the prevalence at the beginning that childhood obesity is a real issue, not even nationally but globally. But with this 3-part plan of dealing with the familial influence, addressing the exercise aspect or more like physical activity aspect, and then also the therapy that would be associated, we feel like with these 3 parts, we would be able to make a huge impact to help see some progress and some improvement in childhood obesity. But thank you guys so much for your time. Anything else you guys want to add?
That's great. Thank you.
Yep, that's everything. Thank you.
Alrighty, sounds good. Thank you guys. Okay, I just ended the screen recording.